You have experienced this, a thought of someone you have not spoken to in months, and within hours, they contact you. A word that appears 3 times in one day, from completely unrelated sources. A dream that seems to describe something that happens the following morning. A moment where everything, the timing, the circumstance, the meaning, feels too precise to be accidental, and you do not know what to do with it. Part of you dismisses it. A coincidence, you tell yourself. Pattern recognition. The brain finding connections that are not really there. But another part of you, quieter, more honest, is not so sure. Carl Jung was not so sure either. And he spent 20 years of his career developing one of the most serious and rigorous psychological frameworks ever constructed for understanding exactly these moments. He called it synchronicity. And what he discovered about the nature of meaningful coincidence, grounded in decades of clinical observation and collaboration with some of the greatest scientific minds of the 20th century, will permanently change how you understand the moments that feel too significant to dismiss. Part 1. What synchronicity actually is. 2-8. Before anything else, let us be precise about what Jung meant, because synchronicity is one of the most misunderstood concepts in all of psychology. It is not the belief that the universe is sending you personal messages. It is not magical thinking. It is not superstition. Dressed in psychological language, Jung was a scientist, a rigorous, empirically minded psychiatrist who spent decades in clinical practice before he developed this concept. And he was careful, extraordinarily careful, about what he was and was not claiming. Synchronicity, as Jung defined it in his 1952 essay of the same name, is the meaningful coincidence of 2 or more events that are not connected by cause and effect, but are connected by meaning. 2 events happen at the same time, or in close temporal proximity, that have no causal relationship to each other, but that carry a shared meaning that is subjectively significant to the person who experiences them. The key word is meaningful. Not every coincidence is synchronicity. Most coincidences are simply coincidences. The brain is a pattern-finding machine, and it will find patterns, real and imagined, constantly. Synchronicity, for Jung, referred specifically to those moments where the coincidence carries a meaning that is, in his precise phrase, an acausal connecting principle. Not caused, but connected through meaning rather than through the ordinary chain of cause and effect that governs the physical world. Jung spent years developing this concept alongside the physicist Wolfgang Pauli, one of the founders of quantum mechanics and a Nobel laureate. This collaboration was not incidental. Jung was genuinely attempting to build a bridge between depth psychology and the emerging understanding of physics, particularly quantum physics, which was itself revealing that the universe at its most fundamental level does not operate according to simple cause and effect mechanics. The result was one of the most unusual and genuinely interesting intellectual collaborations of the 20th century, and the framework they developed together remains, decades later, one of the most serious attempts to account for experiences that conventional science has largely ignored. Part 2. Jung's personal experience. 8-14. Jung did not develop the concept of synchronicity purely theoretically. He developed it because of what he observed in his patients, in his own life, and in the clinical record accumulated over decades of practice. He documented one of the most famous examples in his writing. A patient, a highly rational, intellectually defended woman, had reached an impasse in her analysis. She was intelligent. She understood the psychological concepts. She could articulate her situation clearly, but something was not moving. She remained defended behind a wall of intellectual certainty that Jung could not penetrate through ordinary analytical means. Then, during one session, she described a dream she had had the previous night. In the dream, someone had given her a golden scarab. A scarab, the Egyptian beetle, is one of the oldest symbols of transformation and rebirth in human history. And as she was describing the dream, at that precise moment, Jung heard a tapping at the window behind him. He turned. There, on the outside of the window, was an insect. He opened the window and caught it. It was a scarabade beetle, the closest thing to a golden scarab that exists in that part of Switzerland. It had never appeared in his office before. It never appeared again. He handed it to his patient and said, "Here is your scarab." The effect on her was immediate and significant. The defended rationality cracked. Something in her, something that intellectual analysis had not been able to reach, was reached by that moment. The analysis moved forward. Jung did not claim this proved anything supernatural. He claimed it illustrated something precise, that certain moments carry a quality of meaning that exceeds what ordinary causal explanation can account for, and that these moments, when they occur, have a specific psychological function. They reach something that rational analysis cannot reach. They speak to the unconscious directly, in the language of symbol and meaning, rather than through the indirect channel of conscious understanding. Part 3. The Psychology Behind It, 1400 to 2000. To understand why Jung took synchronicity seriously, you need to understand his broader framework of the psyche. Jung believed that the unconscious is not a passive storage room for forgotten memories and repressed impulses. It is an active, living, self-regulating system. A system that is constantly working to bring the conscious mind into greater awareness, greater wholeness, greater contact with what is real, and the unconscious communicates. It communicates through dreams, through emotional responses that seem disproportionate to their apparent cause, through the persistent feeling that something is missing, through symptoms and patterns and the specific situations that keep recurring in a person's life, and, Jung believed, through synchronistic events, UDD, moments where the outer world and the inner world seem to speak the same thing simultaneously, where an external event and an internal state, a dream, a thought, an emotional preoccupation, mirror each other in a way that carries unmistakable meaning. Jung wrote in Synchronicity, an Acausal connecting principle, that these moments are particularly likely to occur at times of psychological significance, at thresholds, at moments of decision or transition or crisis, at precisely the times when the psyche is most actively engaged in pressing toward greater consciousness. This is not coincidental. The synchronistic event, in Jung's framework, is the unconscious making itself visible in the outer world. Not because the unconscious controls the outer world, but because the boundary between inner and outer, between psyche and world, is less absolute than the ordinary waking mind assumes. This was the genuinely radical claim at the heart of Jung's synchronicity concept, not that the universe sends personal messages, but that the psyche and the world are not as separate as modern Western thought has assumed. That meaning, genuine meaning, is not only an internal human construction projected onto a meaningless world, that it exists, in some sense, as a feature of reality itself. Part 4. What Science Says, 20 minutes to 26 minutes. This is where Jung's collaboration with Wolfgang Pauli becomes significant. Pauli was not a fringe figure. He was one of the founders of quantum mechanics. He formulated the Pauli exclusion principle, one of the foundational principles of modern physics. He was a rigorous, demanding, empirically minded scientist, and he took Jung's synchronicity concept seriously enough to spend years corresponding with him about it, correspondence that was eventually published as the interpretation of nature and the psyche. Why would a physicist of Pauli's stature take this seriously? Because quantum mechanics had itself revealed something deeply uncomfortable for the classical scientific worldview. At the subatomic level, the fundamental level of physical reality, the universe does not behave according to the simple cause and effect mechanics that govern the world of ordinary experience. Particles can be connected across distances, what Einstein famously called spooky action at a distance, in ways that cannot be explained by ordinary causal mechanisms. Observation itself affects what is observed. The boundary between observer and observed, between subject and object, is not as clean as classical physics assumed. Pauli saw in Jung's synchronicity concept a psychological parallel to these quantum phenomena, not an identity, not the claim that synchronicity is caused by quantum mechanics. A parallel, a structural similarity between the way the psyche operates and the way physical reality operates at its most fundamental level. Both involve connections that are not mediated by ordinary causality. Both suggest that the boundary between inner and outer, between mind and world, is more permeable than the ordinary assumptions of Western thought have allowed. Jung was careful, consistently careful, not to claim more than the evidence warranted. He was not saying synchronistic events proved supernatural causation. He was saying they pointed to something that current scientific frameworks were not yet adequate to explain. Something that required, at minimum, a more sophisticated understanding of the relationship between consciousness and physical reality than Western science had yet developed. Decades later, that remains true. The relationship between consciousness and physical reality is one of the deepest, unsolved problems in all of science. Jung was not providing the answer. He was insisting that the question be taken seriously. Part 5. How to recognize it. 26 minutes to 32 minutes. Jung did not provide a formula for identifying synchronistic events. He could not, because synchronicity is inherently subjective, inherently dependent on the meaning the event carries for the specific person who experiences it. But he did identify certain qualities that characterize genuine synchronistic moments. The first is the quality of felt significance. A synchronistic event does not feel like an ordinary coincidence. It carries a weight, a sense of meaning, that is qualitatively different from the ordinary pattern recognition the brain performs constantly. It stops you. It produces a response in the body, a recognition that precedes any intellectual interpretation. Something in you knows this is not ordinary before your mind has finished processing what happened. The second, then, is the correspondence between inner and outer. A genuine synchronistic event involves a meaningful connection between something in the inner world, a dream, a thought, an emotional preoccupation, a question you have been living with, and something that occurs in the outer world. The connection is not causal, but it is precise. The outer event speaks directly to the inner state, in the language of symbol and meaning rather than the language of ordinary logic. The third is temporal proximity. Synchronistic events typically occur in close temporal proximity to the inner state they correspond to, not always simultaneously, but within a time frame that makes the connection felt rather than constructed. The fourth, and most important, is the function it serves. Jung consistently observed that synchronistic events occur at moments of psychological significance, at thresholds, at moments when something needs to shift, when the psyche is pressing toward a transition that the conscious mind has not yet fully acknowledged. The synchronistic event, in these moments, functions as a punctuation mark, a signal from the unconscious expressed through the outer world that says, "Pay attention. Something significant is happening here. Something that requires your full awareness." Part 6. What to do with these moments, 32 minutes to 37 minutes. The question Jung's framework ultimately raises is not whether synchronicity is real in some metaphysical sense. The question is what to do with these moments when they occur. Jung's answer was consistent: pay attention. Not in the sense of constructing elaborate interpretations, not in the sense of treating every coincidence as a cosmic directive, but in the sense of genuine, open, non-defensive attention to what the moment might be pointing toward. What was I thinking or feeling when this occurred? What inner question or preoccupation does this outer event seem to speak to? What might this moment be asking me to notice about my life, my direction, my inner state, that I have not yet fully acknowledged? These questions do not require supernatural belief to be worth asking. They require only the willingness to take seriously the possibility that meaning, genuine meaning, sometimes presents itself in unexpected forms. Jung also emphasized the importance of not over-interpreting. The danger with synchronicity, as with all unconscious material, is that the eager mind will find meaning everywhere, will construct significance where there is none, will use the concept as a tool for wishful thinking, rather than genuine psychological inquiry. The antidote is the same quality Jung brought to all his work: honesty, the willingness to sit with uncertainty rather than immediately resolving it into a convenient interpretation, the capacity to ask, is this genuinely significant, or am I constructing meaning because I want there to be meaning here? That honest discernment between genuine synchronistic experience and wishful pattern finding is itself a form of the psychological maturity Jung spent his career trying to cultivate. Part 7. Jung's deeper point. 37 minutes to 40 minutes, 30 seconds. Beneath the specific concept of synchronicity, beneath the clinical examples and the collaboration with Pauli and the technical framework, Jung was making a deeper point. One that he returned to throughout his long career. The modern Western worldview has produced an extraordinary impoverishment of meaning by insisting that the universe is purely mechanical, purely causal, purely indifferent to human consciousness. It has left modern people in a world where meaning must be entirely self-constructed, where the sense that something is significant, that a moment matters, that a connection is real, has no ground outside the individual human mind that produces it. Jung believed this was both philosophically premature and psychologically damaging. Philosophically premature because, as the collaboration with Pauli suggested, modern physics itself had already revealed that the mechanical worldview was inadequate even as an account of the physical world. Psychologically damaging because, as his clinical work consistently showed, human beings do not thrive in a world drained of meaning. The loss of genuine connection to meaning to the sense that one's life is part of something larger, that significant moments carry real significance, that the inner and outer worlds are not hermetically sealed from each other, produces exactly the kind of hollow, dissatisfied, something is missing experience we discussed earlier. Synchronicity, in Jung's framework, is not a solution to this problem. It is a doorway into a different relationship with reality, one that does not require abandoning scientific rigor, but that does require abandoning the assumption that the mechanical causal model has said the final word about the nature of the world. The moments that feel too significant to dismiss, the coincidences that carry weight, the connections that seem too precise, the events that speak directly to what you have been carrying internally. These are not proof of anything supernatural. They are invitations. Invitations to take seriously the possibility that the boundary between inner and outer, between psyche and world, between meaning and matter, is not as absolute as the modern mind has assumed. And that genuine attention to these moments, honest, discerning, non-wishful attention, is one of the ways the unconscious has always tried to bring the conscious mind into greater awareness, greater wholeness, greater contact with what is actually real. Close 4030 to 4200. Jung spent 50 years arguing that the inner life is not a secondary feature of human existence. It is not a byproduct of brain chemistry to be managed. It is not a collection of inconvenient feelings to be suppressed in favor of productivity. It is the primary territory, the place where the most significant events of a human life actually occur. And synchronicity, the meaningful coincidence, the moment that stops you, the outer event that speaks directly to the inner question you have been living with, is one of the ways the inner life makes itself visible, not through the dramatic or the supernatural, through the ordinary, through the beetle at the window, through the thought of someone that precedes their call, through the word that appears 3 times in one day, from unrelated sources, through the moment where the timing, the circumstance, the meaning feel too precise to dismiss or tough. You have experienced this. The question is not whether these moments occur. The question is whether you are willing to pay them the attention they are asking for, not to construct elaborate interpretations, not to surrender critical thinking, but to pause genuinely and ask what the moment might be pointing toward, what the unconscious might be trying to make visible, what the inner life, which has been speaking to you in every way available to it, is saying through this particular outer event at this particular moment. That question, asked honestly, is the beginning of everything Jung understood about the relationship between consciousness and meaning, and it is available to you in every moment that stops you, in every coincidence that carries weight, in every instant where the inner and the outer seem, against all ordinary expectation, to speak the same thing at the same time. Subscribe to Carl Jung's Psychology and drop a comment below. Have you experienced a moment of synchronicity that you could not explain? Describe it. The community here understands what you are talking about.